Good Object Guru here with another look at some games I recently sampled. As always, I'll be rating these out of 10 based on how interested I am in going back and playing some more. GeoJelly. Simple production doesn't necessarily make for a simple game, as GeoJelly proves with its deviously complex level design. The player controls a glob of goop who, because this is one of those jump challenge games, can only jump left or right. Avoiding what's always a deal breaker for me in these types of games, GeoJelly shows you with a power meter exactly how much strength is going into each jump, letting the player fly exactly as far as they want, up and to the side. I quickly figured out how to gauge what the power levels would do to the goop's jump arcs, and then I was sailing through levels without a care. The game's biggest flaw is that the camera is pulled in way too close, so you can't really get a sense of how you're supposed to progress through the levels. The game's biggest strength is that each level is unlocked by collecting crystals, and there are way more crystals lying around than you need. I played the game like I normally play these things, trying to get all the crystals, but not wasting more than 5 minutes on a level. And by the time I was most of the way through the first world, I'd unlocked the next 2 environments and almost all of the levels inside of them. Just a great jump challenge all around. 6 out of 10. Tears Fall Low. The tale of a tear that finds itself forced to escape the underworld. Tears Fall Low has just bonkers tight controls. This thing is all about double jumping and air dashing through complicated deadly worlds, and the controllers never once let me down for even a moment. The art design is delightful, the level design is diabolical, and I can't say enough good things about the length of the levels. Except for a few slogs, almost every level manages to find that Super Meat Boy sweet spot of offering you just enough hope to keep you restarting. It's easy to want to keep playing when you're just 1 or 2 jumps away from making it to the end after all. I only had 2 issues with the game. The first is that crumbling platforms and dash refresh orbs don't respawn after they're used. So if you screw up a complicated series of jumps, you can't just try again. You have to restart the entire level, no matter how long that level was. The second is that after the first boss fight, I found myself in a room with a raging river that was too wide to jump across. Apparently I was supposed to use a downward dash to skip across its surface, but nothing in the game's mechanics suggested such a thing was possible, and this is the first time we see water in the game. Would have been a great place for another tutorial here, solo developer whose name I should have written down. Still, I look forward to beating this exceptional experience. 8 out of 10. Organ Quarter. The latest attempt to capture the low-res eeriness of strange PS1-era horror games, Organ Quarter is just exceptionally gross to engage with. Set in some kind of bizarre depopulated hellscape, the game simply drips with grime and unpleasantness. As I explored a crumbling apartment building, I found a new disgusting set piece in every unlocked chamber and realized that the game was apparently designed to gradually increase the player's discomfort until they couldn't take it anymore. To which I say, bravo! You've got plenty of monsters I'm psyched to shoot, because I truly don't want to have to look at them any longer. I do have some quibbles though. I couldn't find any subtitles, so the dialogue is inaccessible. Likewise, the documents were weirdly difficult to pick up and read. Even in VR, it's not a sin to just put text on screen, developers. The limited inventory spaces I could handle. It's expected in the genre after all. But my biggest issue was the game's gun handling. You can't adjust the angle of the gun, so I was forced to hold it unnaturally. And the lack of bullet holes on missed shots makes it impossible to judge how you're doing aiming at things. Like, I can tell when I hit something, but when I miss, it's hard to tell why. So it's almost impossible to make accurate adjustments. Still, Organ Quarter wants to feel like those awkward, janky PS1 survival horror titles, except in VR, and it more than pulls that off. 7 out of 10. Spectralite. First-person parkour is difficult to master at the best of times. There's only a handful of games that really nail it, and I'm sad to say that Spectralite doesn't quite get there. It's got a great look to it, going from grayscale simulation spaces to a wrecked neon megapolis and back again. And the wall running is unusually accessible for the genre. But there's an unpredictable floatiness to the movement that kept me from ever feeling like I was getting a hang on the action. There's one big issue in first-person parkour, and that's not knowing where your feet are. By definition, you're going to spend all of your time in this kind of game looking ahead, which makes picking the exact right moment to jump perilously difficult. Dying Light famously gets around this by massively abusing coyote time, and giving the player a full meter of extra runway after they've run off a building in which they can jump. Spectralite never finds this sweet spot of simulation versus plausibility, making it way more frustrating than it should be. If ledges were my only issue, I maybe could have gradually worked on my timing until I've gotten the hang of it, but the real problem is with the super jump ability, which throws the players forward if they hold down the jump button 1/3 of a second before hitting the ground from a previous jump. Unfortunately, accomplishing this requires having a perfect idea of when you're going to hit the ground, which the first-person perspective makes basically impossible. And yes, the game cannot be completed without mastering the super jump. I wanted to love this, but it's beyond my abilities, so I'm not going to be finishing it. 3 out of 10. Galactic Glitch Prologue. As a dedicated twin-stick shooter aficionado, it's always a pleasure to see developers who love the genre every bit as much as I do, and are dedicated to getting the feel of their game perfect. Galactic Glitch is set inside of a computer, with the player trying to destabilize systems and fight firewalls and antivirus tech for reasons I'm sure will become clear in the full game. All I can say for now is that the variety of weapons and upgrades is simply unparalleled. Across the demo, I tried out 3 main weapons, each of which came with its own variety of competing mods that allowed me to develop them in different, exciting ways. The most interesting hook, though, is the grab function, which allows the player to grab obstacles, missiles, and even smaller enemy craft and hurl them as weapons. It changes up the flow of combat in interesting ways, making the player feel incredibly powerful as they zip through levels, using enemies' own weapons and compatriots against them. The boss was great, and there's an interesting feature wherein the arena walls are elastic. So even if the player misses when hurling a projectile at a foe, they'll get another chance when it comes bouncing back into the playfield. It's an all-around exceptional twin-stick shooter, and I can't wait to play the full game. This is a perfect demo, 10 out of 10. Wild Frontier. Despite the developer's long-standing hatred of me, I remain a pretty big fan of The Long Dark, which I consider to be the gold standard of survival experiences. A hostile environment, scary wildlife, and the constant struggle to stay just above starving. It's magnificent, and invariably what I wind up comparing all other survival games to. Sadly, most other survival games draw not from the majesty of The Long Dark, but from the generic formlessness of Minecraft, asking players to spend their time clear-cutting forests to build elaborate forts to defend themselves, all while struggling with quickly degrading tools that need to be constantly replenished. Wild Frontier, I'm sorry to say, follows this structure to a T, going so far as to add in tool degradation when the player is crafting. That's right, you can't make anything but the most basic flint knife without damaging one tool or another. This wouldn't be so bad if the game just automatically subtracted the durability from whatever the shoddiest tool was, but the player has to equip each tool before crafting, which makes long crafting sessions something of a slog. Even worse, the game commits the greatest sin of all, adding a nutrient system to the food requirement. That's right, in this game food isn't just a number, it's a series of different numbers that have to be constantly checked on and balanced. I hated this in Green Hell, and I can't believe anyone was silly enough to try and replicate it in another game. At least Green Hell was kind enough to let the player turn that annoying feature off. Wild Frontier isn't as respectful of its players' time and attention. 2 out of 10. Red Moon. So, funny story. I was sent review codes for this and Wild Frontier within a week of one another, and played them just a day apart. Why is that funny? Because this is effectively the exact same game as Wild Frontier, as they both seem to have been built around a common pre-made survival game development kit. Same resources, same craftables, same god-awful nutrition system. I effectively played the same game twice, with only one significant difference. Where Wild Frontier was freeform in its goals, Red Moon is set during a zombie apocalypse and tells the player right off that their goal is to build a strong enough base to withstand a zombie wave in a couple of days. Also, they can lower the strength of zombie waves by burning zombie nests with Molotov cocktails, suggesting that the developers of this game were at least familiar with State of Decay. So that's a plus. And the player also has access to a motorcycle for fast travel, making this better than Wild Frontier by almost every metric available. Still, it's got the nutrient system, so I'm likely never going to play it again. But it's definitely deserving of a higher score, I'd say 2 whole points. Except that the players added a bizarre restriction that Wild Frontier doesn't have, in which the player can only rest at night, meaning that if they run out of energy after harvesting a bunch of resources, there's literally no way to replenish it, except by waiting around until night. So yeah, they're losing a point for that one. 3 out of 10. Bunker Builder Simulator Prologue. It's another building game from Playway. It's got the same baseline functionality you'd expect from one of these. Start by digging a hole in the ground, put down the various slabs and fixtures inside, and then seal it all up for doomsday. Sadly, the game fails to embrace the time-saving elements that so many other games have pioneered. For example, after establishing where a wall should go, I have to buy a bunch of girders, which makes sense. But less explicable is the way the game makes you individually grab each girder, walk over to the wall segment to install it, and then walk back to some pallets to pick up the next. While I enjoy performing the detail work of welding metal and pouring concrete, there's no reason to complicate things by not allowing the player to just have an inventory to speed all of it along. The fun of this type of game is watching something appear from nothing. You can look to the Construction Simulator series for a perfect example of how to streamline the construction steps without robbing players of the feeling that they're actually doing the work. This is just a demo, of course, so there's plenty of time for the devs to strip out the grind for the finished product, which I'm definitely interested in sampling. 6 out of 10. Santa Monster Shootout. Barely offering any gameplay to speak of, this 2D shooter has the player walking back and forth, shooting various monsters as Santa. I hope your trigger finger is limber and resistant to stress, because most weapons don't have automatic fire, and every monster requires a bunch of shots to finish off. It's the minimum amount of gameplay required to call something a game, and it goes from bad to unplayable with almost impressive speed. Enemies ramp up in difficulty incredibly quickly, with enemies getting so strong that it's literally impossible to kill them with the base gun. And since enemies don't give enough money when killed to reimburse the player for the ammo used to kill them, even playing the game quickly turns into a death spiral that becomes pointless by level 8. Unlimited, or at least much cheaper ammo would go a long way towards improving this game, although there's so little to recommend it that I wonder if anyone should bother. 1 out of 10. Casino Roulette Royale. Wait, there's no E. Casino Roulette Royal. There's very little to talk about here, as there's no narrative of any kind or any complicating factors keeping this from being anything other than an update of Intellivision's Las Vegas Roulette from 1980. Unfortunately, despite the nice graphics, it has 2 big flaws. 1. These thirds list the odds at 2 to 1, but they're actually 3 to 1. But that's minor compared to the huge problem that effectively breaks the entire game. If you ever go bankrupt, the game restarts with the player being given a starting funds of 5,000 space bucks. But no matter what they do, the minute they spin in a second game, they go bust. If they hit the number, they go bust. If they bet nothing, they go bust. This can only be fixed by closing and restarting the game, which gives players another chance to start out with 5,000 space bucks that they can actually, play the game with. Huge glitch that needs to be patched out. But hey, there's an easy platinum here if that's something that's important to you. 2 out of 10. Classic Racers Elite. Classic cars racing time trials on rally tracks. It's all very basic and lo-fi, but in a way that I found oddly charming. There's a purity inherent to stripping away all of the bells and whistles and just saying to a player, look, here's a stretch of road, how fast can you go down it? No sponsors, no mechanics, no car tuning, just how adept is the player at managing acceleration, steering, and braking. Am I personally great at doing any of that? Good lord, no! I'm terrible at racing games. But I can appreciate it when developers want to create the feeling of speed in a game, and that's clearly the goal here. There's a decent number of cars to race, nice variety in tracks, and while the graphics won't blow anyone away, they succeed in making the tracks feel authentic enough when you're blasting through them in a cigar with wheels. Yes, it's a budget racing title, but it focuses on the essentials and provides a thrilling experience. What more could you ask for at the price? 6 out of 10. Tomb Explorer VR. It's Tomb Raider in VR. What more do you people want? Seriously though, this thing is charming as heck. The player starts next to Petra and has to work their way into the temple by climbing walls and solving object-based puzzles. At the moment, there's no combat of any kind, although presumably that will be added later. And the game is impressively detailed and functions perfectly well. The environments look good, the climbing feels great, and sliding down zip lines over a chasm was suitably terrifying. I rate VR climbing games based on whether they fill me with a genuine unease or not, and this demo passed with flying colors. It's not without its problems. Lights are weirdly difficult to bolt to the player's body. You'd think this guy would have brought a flashlight with him before going spelunking. And trying to put treasure into the backpack is a bit of a chore. The biggest problem, though, is in crouching. Whenever I pressed the duck button and tried to move under a low area, the game kept getting me caught and forced me to fiddle with the controller until I cheated my way through. Is this bad coding? Am I too tall? Whatever it is, they've got to fix it before the game comes out, or I'm going to have real trouble playing it. Despite those hiccups, I'm extremely excited to play more of this once it goes into early access. 7 out of 10. Tiny Thor. There used to be hundreds of platformers like this. Zools and Decapitax and Bonks, and I want to say Chester Cheetah? But that's the Cheetos guy. Who is the cat that collected yarn? Anyway, the point is, back in the day, there were countless developers trying to jump onto the Mario Sonic bandwagon and provide us with classic platforming experiences. Were many of them great? Almost never, no. But with so much stuff being thrown at the wall, you were bound to luck into some fantastic experiences here and there. And Tiny Thor feels like one of those games you'd be happy to stumble on when Yoshi's Island was already rented at the store. God, I'm old. The premise is charmingly simple. Race through levels collecting crystals and throwing your hammer at enemies. There are cute complications, slides and bounce pads, and targets that have to be struck by throwing the hammer at precise angles. I hope your controller's thumbstick is better than mine when you get to those, by the way. But at its core, this is just a challenging retro romp that's perfect to pick up and zip through for anyone who wants a bit of nostalgia. It's Bubsy. I was thinking of Bubsy. 8 out of 10. I've been the Hidden Object Guru. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time, please remember to like and subscribe. We'll see you back here when I've played some more games. But until then, I'll say that's right. Au revoir.